So we've talked about the Joe Burrows and the Matt Staffords and the Cooper Kupps and the Jamar Chases of the world, but let's take a step back. Obviously, when it comes to football, it's not always about the stars. In fact, oftentimes it comes down to your depth players and your role players being the ones who can make a difference. That's a big reason why both of these two teams are here, is because they've had other guys besides their stars step up, along with their stars themselves stepping up. So let's just in this video talk about some of the potential surprise Super Bowl heroes that could be at play here. Someone who maybe people aren't really breaking down prior to the Super Bowl, but could end up having a big Super Bowl impact and end up in a couple of days being a Super Bowl hero. First, let's start off with Von Bell. We're going to start off with Cincinnati and then go over to the Rams. I think Von Bell could have a huge impact. You know, everyone's talking about Jesse Bates, but their other safety has been playing really good football. He did have an overtime interception in a conference championship game. Not too many guys can say that. Von Bell has been a big impact player for the Bengals, and specifically why I think he could have a huge impact is his value in the running game. He can beat up on wide receivers pretty consistently in these one-on-one matchups, and the Rams like to have their wide receivers serve as tight ends. I could see Von Bell being someone who gets a good amount of tackles and has a big impact if Cincinnati goes on to win. The next guy to talk about is Tyler Boyd, another guy who I think it's fair to say with Tyler Boyd, like, okay, he's a pretty decently big name, so maybe it's unfair to include him on this list, but I want to include him anyways. The reality is Tyler Boyd probably will have an impact in this game because T. Higgins and Jamar Chase take so much away. It could be Tyler Boyd, who typically plays very well against zone coverage. The Rams might play a lot of zone coverage in this one. I could see him getting a decent amount of catches. Also, Samandre Pirine, I could see having a big impact in this one, largely due to the fact that, okay, he's a backup halfback, so you don't think of him too much because you're thinking about Joe Mixon, but I could see a scenario where he gets a decent amount of catches out of the backfield, and this is probably a game where you're going to throw to the halfbacks a lot. So Joe Mixon's obviously too big of a name to be a surprise hero, but Pirine also fills that role. He'll also get playing time. He could be that surprise hero. Also, how about Drew Sample? He is their backup tight end, but again, we don't know if Uzomah will be available to go or not. So if he can't go, Drew Sample could be the guy who's stepping in. And kind of like I said when I talked about Tyler Boyd, when you have guys like T. Higgins and guys like Jamar Chase who are going to take away so much and, you know, just draw so much attention, could be those second and third options that could come into play, or third and fourth options in this case. I could see Sample potentially actually having a big Super Bowl. This one might be a surprise, but how about Eli Apple? Eli Apple has made some big plays in the stretch, you know, that we've seen these past couple of games for Cincinnati. I wouldn't be shocked if Eli Apple does have a decent game in this one. I think that he, you know, as my podcast co-host Kyle pointed out, which I think is a fair point, they're going to throw at Eli Apple a lot, right? He gets a lot of targets. So if he can, you know, maybe there's a miscommunication, and if he can catch a football and return it for a touchdown or something, you could see that happening, and quite the redemption arc it would be. We've seen him make big plays in this postseason run already. So even though he might not be the most talented player, it's more about kind of the situation he's in. Again, for a potential surprise hero, he could potentially be a surprise hero in this one. And finally, tying a couple together, how about Logan Wilson / Jermaine Pratt? Listen, the linebackers for Cincinnati don't really get too much attention, but they are good players. And I think specifically why I think these could be surprise heroes is I think back to this, you know, Super Bowl 53 against the Rams, where Sean McVay, a big part of why he wasn't able to get stuff going was because Dante Hightower was just very well prepared in that game and constantly getting in these passing lanes. And typically that's how Sean McVay likes to run his offense, is you kind of get linebackers out of position. So for Cincinnati, if their linebackers can get in position, which they do a decent job of, that could go a long way, and that's why they might actually be really key impact players in this one. Going over to the Rams now, let's start off with Van Jefferson, kind of similar to Tyler Boyd in that people know who Van Jefferson is, but still, I feel like this is the kind of one of those situations where you have Cooper Kupp, you have Odell Beckham Jr., you might have Tyler Higbee if he's healthy. Van Jefferson's kind of the guy who isn't getting looked at as much, but he's a good player, and he certainly can make some plays in this one. I wouldn't be shocked whatsoever. Again, maybe he's too big of a name to be a surprise hero, but I could see him actually having a decent impact, that the third option in football is so important. And also, how about Bennett Skowronek, who is someone who, this might be a surprise to some people, but he's had some opportunities to make some big plays this season, including the one he dropped in the conference championship game. So if he can get one of those opportunities and hit it, I think it's totally possible he could get one or two of those plays because, again, all of the attention on those other guys, and he has had opportunities this year. So, again, not the biggest name, but that's what we're doing here. Looking at guys who maybe don't have the biggest name, but could have big impacts. And speaking of that, let's go to Kendall Blanton. So, very similar to the Drew Sample thing on the other side. You do see that kind of some of my potential surprise heroes are backups who could have a bigger role than maybe others would expect because, listen, we don't know Tyler Higbee's status. And if he's not able to go, then Kendall Blanton, he, in the conference championship, got some targets. And quite frankly, he'll probably get some targets even if Higbee can go. But really, the way that he would be a hero in this one would be if Higbee isn't able to go. I could see him being a guy who, again, when you can't throw to the first two options, well, who are you going to throw to? It's going to be Skowronek, it's going to be Jefferson, and it's going to be Kendall Blanton. So I think Kendall Blanton is someone who could potentially have a big impact, which, talk about putting pressure on some of these guys who haven't had a lot of work to now perform in the Super Bowl, but we'll see if they rise to the challenge or if they have to. Also, how about Darius Williams? Now, Darius Williams, probably the biggest name on this list, maybe him or Von Bell, but I think that it's worth bringing him up just simply because, okay, if Jalen Ramsey is on Ja'Marr Chase and there's safety help, Ja'Marr Chase isn't going to get the football that often. He's just not. So then what's the next matchup? It's T. Higgins versus Darius Williams. And listen, there's a very real chance T. Higgins can win that matchup pretty significantly. That's a possibility. There's also a very real possibility that Darius Williams can make a big play or two. Williams hasn't had the season he had last year, but we still have seen that talent. I still remember that pick 6 against Russell Wilson in the playoffs. If he could do something like that in the Super Bowl, I don't think it's crazy to think he could be a surprise hero. I certainly think the game in some ways can even hinge on Darius Williams a little bit and how he can do on Higgins. And I actually don't think it would be the worst strategy in the world if I'm the Rams, would be to put Williams on Chase, which sounds a little bit crazy, but you just make sure the safety is covering Chase on those plays. So therefore, now you have Ramsey covering Higgins, and that can work out a lot better. But regardless, Williams is going to have an important day in this one, which means he could be a surprise hero. He could be a GOAT. In the negative way, we'll have to see. And finally, I also am kind of including two together. How about Greg Gaines / A'Shawn Robinson right here? And my logic is, with all the attention that Aaron Donald is going to take up, and the fact that the Bengals still have to figure out even who's going to get more snaps at right guard, which is crazy to be doing that in a Super Bowl game. Although I don't blame him too much because it's just a weird situation there. I think that these guys could have big impacts. These are two interior defensive linemen, and I think that if you do see a lot of one-on-one matchups with, Aaron Donald, he'll probably feast, so you'll probably want to get the double teams, but that could mean that either Robinson or Gaines is going up one-on-one a lot of times against whoever the right guard is, whether it's Carman or Adeniji, and I could see there being a lot of pressure that way. So I wouldn't be shocked at all to see either of these two guys have multiple sacks, even though they might not be the biggest name. They're really good players, and they've had really good seasons. It's just when you're on a star-studded defensive line, you don't get the credit that you probably deserve, but they're very good. So these are, a couple more potential surprise heroes. So yeah, leaving no stone unturned here in the preview stuff, but I think it's very fascinating. And these are kind of some of the guys who I could see being a hero that maybe other people aren't expecting. And it's always kind of a weird conversation of how do I determine what people are expecting and what people aren't, but that's why I have them. Let me know in the comments below, who do you think could be a potential surprise hero that I didn't mention? Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.